I decided to do it differently. Scientists, I like to have slides in front of me. I don't like to be able to memorise the speeches, etc. So I'll go from this. And this is the Silver Jubilee of the ISNS. So, and our meeting title is on the slide here. But what I need to do is to talk to you about a brief history of newborn screening, some of the champions, and only a very small number, and there's a number of champions that are missed out, and talking about interacting with colleagues and friends associated with coming to meetings. Anything associated with metabolic meetings has to consider Archibald Garrett as a champion and a pillar of what we're actually doing. But then, of course, newborn screening started with the Guthrie, with PKU, and was long before newborn screening actually existed that Folling discovered PKU, and then Jarvis discovered the familial nature of PKU and also the accumulation of phenylalanine in PKU. But it wasn't until the diet that Horst Bickel developed, which meant that patients with PKU could actually be treated and have something done to them, that it was actually, the race was on to actually find testing to obtain these people before they had any clinical signs and symptoms. Bob Guthrie did a number of very significant things for us. He developed the Bacterial Inhibition Assay, which all of you know about, but as well as that, one of his greatest achievements was developing the filter paper card for sending samples around to different locations, and this is ideal for places as large as the geographical size of Australia. But there were a number of meetings in the 1960s. There were meetings in Dubrovnik and Tel Aviv, and they were pre-ISNS as such meetings. So if we look at the decades from the 1960s, when Guthrie first developed his test, until now, we can see in the number of different things that have actually happened. Of course, in 1968, the Wilson and Jungner criteria, and we'll hear a lot more about that during the rest of the conference. In 1972 and 78, we had meetings in Warsaw and Heidelberg, but as well in the 70s, we had significant achievements like the addition of hypothyroidism. In 1973, it was T4 by radioimmunoassay. In 76, there was TSH and by ELISA, and then later by fluoroimmunoassay. And the samples were variable around the world. It wasn't all dried blood spots, it was dried blood, cord, blood, serum, depending on exactly where you're getting your samples from. But hypothyroidism is the most included disorder in newborn screening programs. I had previously thought that it was the only one included in all newborn screening programs, but I've been corrected. There are some programs that are doing hemoglobinopathies. As well as that, we have, as well in 73, we had the hemoglobinopathies developed by Garrick, and Sonia Pang developed testing for CAH. In the 70s, we also had Jeanette Crosley from New Zealand and Bob Elliott, who developed the testing for cystic fibrosis, the immunoreactive trypsin test. And we have in Australia, and particularly in New South Wales, some very first-hand experience with this. We were one of the first programs in the world to actually incorporate immunoreactive trypsin screening for cystic fibrosis. And one of the little anecdotes that I'd like to share with you is the first antibodies that were produced in rabbits, and they were polyclonal antibodies, and the two rabbits' names were Mumps and Bumps. And those two rabbits had 100% positive predictive value for cystic fibrosis on a sample collected at 3 to 5 weeks when it was actually at its most specific. They were fantastic rabbits, but unfortunately they didn't stay with us for far too long, and once they passed, the subsequent rabbits were never as good. Okay. It then went on to a commercial assay, which was a monoclonal antibody, and on the initial newborn screening sample, that had a positive predictive value of only 5%, which is a sample collected around 3 to 5 days at that stage. And on the second newborn screening sample at 3 to 5 weeks, it has a positive predictive value of 50%. So it's only half as good as the initial bunnies. Of course, in 1982, there was meetings in Tokyo and Texas, and again in Japan, there was the first quality control meeting, and in 1988, a meeting in Sao Paulo. And that's where there was a lot of discussions about forming the ISNS, and of course, it greyed out at the bottom here is the first meeting. As well, in the 80s, we have the addition of the CDC Quality Assurance Program, and this was provided by Harry Hannon, and it was to gain confidence through the external quality assurance programs and dried blood spot testing, and we heard a lot more about that earlier this afternoon. We had the International Quality Assurance meeting, as I mentioned. We had more information on cystic fibrosis because we had the addition of DNA or variant analysis into our programs, and that happened after the delineation of the particular mutations associated with CF in 1989. I won't go through all the details of this slide because some of you have actually seen it before, but we've been lucky in that most of the babies with cystic fibrosis have one particular mutation, but there's a lot of other things to say about that. But then ISNS actually had its own meetings. The first meeting was held in Leura, Australia, and I was lucky enough to actually be part of that. Then we had meetings in 93 in France, 96 in Boston, 99 in Stockholm, 2002 in Genoa, 2006 in Awaji, Cancun, Atlanta, and now in The Hague. And just to give you some little photos of some of the little bits we had for the 1991 meeting in Australia, this was the program book. But then, of course, as well as the program book, we actually produced a text of all of the important changes that were actually available associated with that meeting, and that doesn't seem to happen anymore, so maybe we can reconsider that, although we actually do have our journal that we get information from. The International Journal of Screening was actually put together in 1991. In the 1990s as well, we have a whole lot more DNA stuff. We have Ed McCabe and Phil Farrell looking at cystic fibrosis. We had in 93, we had our second meeting, and I don't know whether any of you can see this, but up the top you can see my name scribbled on some of these brochures as well. Okay. We have huge changes in the 1990s with introduction of tandem mass spectrometry, and we have people like Dave Millington, Don Chase, and Mohammed Rashed to actually thank for that. In the 1990s, incorporating tandem mass was actually a big rush. In 1992, there was a private lab in Pennsylvania that screened Pennsylvania and Georgia. And then there was the Saudi Arabia program, pilot program by Mohammed. In 1998 to 99, there were actually 2 Australian programs and 1 in Germany. There was a pilot program in the UK, but screening was limited to PKU until 2004, and then MCAD was added as part for screening. There were 2 states in the US and Argentina, and in 2002 there were plans in many US states, France and the Netherlands, to add tandem mass spectrometry. But of course the instrumentation's changed significantly over time. A number of you saw this morning that instruments that Enzo uses in South Australia that were actually from a different manufacturer from these ones, but this is the instruments that have been in our lab here. As well as that, in the 1990s we had the introduction or the extra information about long-term storage of samples, particularly in things like the biobank here in Europe. In 1999, we had an excellent meeting in France that was very well attended. In the 2000s, we had some information that we're actually trying to do. We looked at criteria for screening. We started bandying about the word harmonisation, trying to actually get coordination of all the programs, and we had a huge effort for expansion of programs. In the US, there was the ACMG criteria sheet for scoring for initial uniform panel for screening, and it looked at a number of different criteria associated with the things that are actually relevant, and then produced a report in 2006. And if you look at the number of disorders that were actually included in that, you can see that even down to cystic fibrosis was only just included in the routine universal screening panel in the RUSP. One of the things that I actually want to try and make sure that everyone knows, and this was again mentioned earlier today, just because something's actually been included at a government level doesn't mean that it gets done automatically and instantly within the programs. This slide is courtesy of Jalili Ojudu, and X-linked ALD, some of you know, was added to the US screening panels in February of this year. And then each state has to decide whether to add the disorder to the screening panel or not, and that can take between 6 months and a year. Then the state has to change its rules or statutes. Again, that takes another 6 months to a year. The state then has to obtain funding for doing the testing. That can take from 1 to 3 years. Then the state has to conduct implementation or pilot testing, and that takes from 1 to 3 years. So in the US, it can take from 3 to 8 years. But of course, some programs are actually proactive, and they have some of those steps done in advance of that happening. We had the 6th international meeting of the ISNS in The Hague in Owagi in Tokyo in 2006, and I love the fact that this bridge was actually on the front of the poster, because some of you will remember that we actually went to the conference dinner on the other side of the bridge from where we were actually staying, and then a hurricane was coming. So we all had to drop our dinner and get on the buses as quick as possible to get back across the bridge, otherwise we wouldn't be able to sleep the night, etc. Okay. We had more dramas on the 7th international meeting, because that was held in Cancun, and at the time of swine problems. So they had it had to be delayed. It was actually ended up being held in December, and it was meant to have been held much earlier in the year. In the 2010s, we have the 50 years of newborn screening being celebrated, and the APHL and the Americans can actually do it in a great way. They have the Jumbathon in Times Square, giving advertisements about newborn screening and the advantages of newborn screening. I'm now going to share with you a couple of slides that I've got from various times throughout my career. So we've got things like the CDC group that actually have a lot of fun. We've got important people like Rodney Pollard, Harry Hannon. Then we've got other various conferences and actually meeting with and mingling with our various colleagues, etc. And so I'm just sharing these with you relatively quickly. Here's some of the 50 years of newborn screening. This is my mentor, Bridget Wilkin, who's not with us here at this meeting today. There's some more. There's Scott there and Jalili, various other people, etc. We've got a number of partners in crime in this one here, including Gerard. And then there's a slightly larger group also sharing along with Marika, etc. This one here is to show that it's not just at the conference, but even when your hosts will actually take you out to look at various beautiful sites, conversations about newborn screening continue on. It's not about looking at everything else that's happening. Those of us in newborn screening keep looking and keep talking about newborn screening. Some other things to share with you, so that's fine. But I just wanted to remind you that screening tests are actually not diagnostic. What we're doing is finding people who might have something compared to people who actually are unlikely to have something. We need to be associated with diagnostic laboratories and diagnostic testings as well. So one of the take-home messages for you from this meeting is that newborn screening reliably detects many disorders, but it detects other disorders with lower sensitivities. We have a very low false positive rate, but we aim to have that. We have liaison with population-matched biochemical diagnostic departments to provide essential data for performance indicators, and that's really important for all of you to actually consider. It detects disorders which are potentially damaging or lethal without early treatment, and our challenge is still how do we harmonise with each other, and there's a number of challenges. Expanding coverage, we need to know that more than half the newborns in the world are not screened for anything yet. We need to expand with additional disorders. We need to consider the impact of DNA-based testing on next-generation sequencing or whole genome sequencing, and we need to continue to engage our governments in everything that we're actually doing. So we particularly thank the government officials for coming to this meeting here. But I'd now just like to say at the very end, thank you very much and welcome to the ISNS Silver Jubilee, 25 years of sharing knowledge globally. Thank you.